In our way, and our golden age has just begun.
This is Human Events with Jack Posobiec.
Now it's time for everyone to understand what America First truly means.
Welcome to the Second American Revolution.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We are back here, Human Events Daily, Real America's Voice. Folks, somewhere along the way, we in this country, we went a little bit astray. We traded real flavor for seed oils and processed junk. And this Thanksgiving, it's time to take back our kitchens. And Human Events' new partners over at Steak and Shake are here to help. And they're introducing Steak and Shake's 100% pure beef tallow. No chemicals, no fillers. Just premium beef fat rendered the old-fashioned way, the way that my Polish grandparents used to cook. Right now, they've got two options to choose from, both at steakanshake.com. That's Steak and Shake with the letter N. Now, that's the grass-fed beef tallow, only $9 a jar. But then there's also the American Wagyu beef tallow, $12 a jar, with rich, buttery taste. Or you could bundle them both together for $19.99 and revolutionize your cooking for not just Thanksgiving, but think Christmas, think gifts. Folks, fry the crispiest fries, sear the perfect steak, roast vegetables bursting with real flavor. This is how food should taste. So bring tradition and taste back to your table with Steak and Shake beef tallow. Order now at steakanshake.com. That's steakanshake.com with the letter N. All right, so J.D. Vance, we're told right now we're down at Fort Campbell with Secretary of the Army Driscoll, who has also been sort of the new special envoy on Ukraine, working on this tack with Wyckoff. We've got some of the images right there of Vice President J.D. Vance as well as Dan Driscoll there with the troops handing out meals for this Thanksgiving time. It's an incredible work from our Vice President, former United States Marine himself. Oh, belay my last. There's no such thing as a former Marine. He is a Marine. Someone else who is a Marine is joining us right now. It is Dan Caldwell, a former, I can say former here, official over at the Pentagon. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Jack.
So walk me through this story of the leaks, which I have to say, when I was talking about, I said, I predict there's going to be a leaked phone call of these peace talks between Trump and I thought it'd be, Trump and Zelensky or Trump and Putin. But yeah, here we go. Less than 2 hours later, we get this leak. I'm calling it the Wyckoff Leaks, right? We had the WikiLeaks, now we have the Wyckoff Leaks. And they're leaking this out because it's very simple. They're trying to blow up these peace talks. And people are saying, oh, well, he said this about Trump and he said this about Putin. It's just stop. Right? Stop. They're having a conversation. He's building rapport. Obviously, he's doing his job. And Dan, what are you hearing inside the system? Because I know you still have your ear to the ground in D.C. regarding these talks. Why does it seem like this town, the town of D.C., is trying to blow them up?
Well, they want them to fail for a number of reasons. So let's just say you've nailed it. The timing of this is just too perfect. Is that President Trump truthed out that Dan Driscoll and Steve Wyckoff were going to go Driscoll to Kyiv, Wyckoff to Moscow, and that was a sign that these talks were making actual progress. So surprise, surprise, somebody, I have my suspicions of who it is, but I'm not going to say it here, but I'll just say it's somebody who doesn't want to see these talks succeed because they have a vested interest in the war continuing. And within Washington, D.C., there are obviously a lot of entities, obviously certain parts of the government, but also the think tank community, the media. They invested in this narrative for years that Ukraine could achieve a total victory, reclaim all the land it lost from 2014 to 2022, and ultimately deal decisive defeat to Putin. And we all knew at the time, those of us that understand these things, that can do basic math, understood that Russia had key advantages that the Ukrainians couldn't overcome, even with American and NATO support, and that the war was always going to end at the negotiating table. And they denied that for years. So their credibility is on the line. And there's also people involved that have a financial interest in the war continuing. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to take down people like Steve Wyckoff, who, by the way, I just have to say, I think is a patriot. He could be sitting on a beach in Miami right now, but instead is flying around the world trying to end wars for President Trump. And they're also trying to divide the Trump team. They're trying to pit them against each other. And it's absolutely disgusting. But I think that the silver lining is it is a sign that these talks are making actual progress. And that's what this is really about.
And I think you're exactly right. And by the way, that's so true about Steve Wyckoff, and by the way, so many other members of the administration, that and including up to and including the president himself. They could all be just sitting on a beach. He could be sitting down at Mar-a-Lago, which is one of the most beautiful clubs in the entire world, and he could be kicking up. He's got his money, he's got his fame, his family, his supermodel wife. You know, he could be doing it all. He's not. None of these guys are. Steve Wyckoff doesn't even draw a salary, and I believe, if I remember correctly, he still flies around on his personal plane. He doesn't even take a government plane when he's doing all this travel all around the world. And imagine us actually having, you know, in the past, you couldn't even dream of having something like this. So, of course, what they're going to do is pit against it. They're going to attack. They're trying to do everything they can, because when it comes down to it, I think you're right that they are, and they have been, selling a lie for all of these years. And particularly, I said this on Steve Bannon earlier this morning, particularly, I think that the leaders of Western Europe are also using this threat of Russia, this constant threat of war. You have to be careful. You know, we have to keep continuing the war, because it's very important, or else we're about to be destroyed. What are they doing? They're using that to distract from the failures of their own governments, the failures of massive inflation across Western Europe, and, oh, by the way, the failures of them to defend their borders in the face of this massive migrant invasion that is absolutely embroiling all of Western Europe right now. They're raping little girls, they're killing people, and they say, oh, don't worry about it, because, you know, the real threat is Russia. And so I think that the minute that this goes away, now all of a sudden they're going to have to face their own people. And by the way, that also holds true for Zelensky, who the minute that martial law is rescinded in Ukraine, he's going to have to stand for elections, which he has not done since 2019.
And he'll likely lose. The polling in Ukraine shows that he will likely be defeated by either, you know, an ultranationalist or a former member of the military. He has a vested interest in the war continuing, or maybe as part of the peace deal, getting an out, maybe getting a condo in another country. So I think maybe that may be at play as well too. I have to say something else, Jack, just to back up on the attacks against not just Steve Wyckoff, but Dan Driscoll, Vice President Vance, and whatnot. There is an element of jealousy here. Is that you had the Biden administration full of these highly credentialed diplomats and people that had served in all the right posts throughout their career, people like Victoria Nuland, Tony Blinken, Brett McGurk, and their entire legacy is one of failure and death and destruction. And here you have guys like Steve Wyckoff, who in 9-10 months have ended more wars and ended more suffering and ended more bloodshed than they did in their entire 20 and 30 years. So they're jealous. They're jealous of what Steve Wyckoff and President Trump and Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio and now Secretary Driscoll are doing. And that is so apparent in some of these comments you made. I mean, God forbid you turn on CNN, but you can just see the acid and the jealousy coming out of these people. And I think you can't ignore that human element as well too here.
Well, no, I think that's true. And I would just add that, you know, you go back to the Obama administration, which, of course, Biden played a huge role in, and all the way back to the events of 2014, where you've got, again, you just can't separate all of these things that happen. And people say, why are you bringing that stuff up? Because you can't separate them from the history. You can't separate the fact that Biden's son was on the board of an energy company in Ukraine while he was the sitting vice president in the middle of what a lot of people have called a regime change operation, certainly something that had folks like John McCain and Lindsey Graham and others going over there trying to fan Amy Klobuchar was over there trying to fan the flames.
Standing with literal Nazis.
Right, with standing on stage with literal Nazis, people who were mercilessly slaughtering Jewish and Polish villages in eastern Galicia, you know, during World War II, these reprisals, the Banderas, and yet, you know, we act like, oh no, this was just, you know, it was just a totally natural, organic uprising. The United States had nothing to do with it, and you know, you really have to sit back and ask the question, you know, when people in the area feel that this was provoked, when we do things like that, they might just have a point.
Yeah, absolutely. Is you cannot, there's a straight line from Victoria Nuland handing out cookies on the Maidan to neo-Nazi organizations to what we're dealing with now. It's a straight line of foreign policy establishment failure. And that is the world that President Trump walked into. And it's a world he has to operate in. And this gets to the most important point, is that there's this delusion that there's this magic set of sanctions and munitions and arms that you can dump into Ukraine. You can impose these sanctions on Russia, and Russia will buckle and withdraw and agree to terms that are more favorable to Ukraine. That is not reality. And the reality is that the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for Ukraine. And President Trump and his team knows that. And that is why they are aggressively pursuing this deal. And all the people that are trying to say that it gives too much to Russia or it's going to undermine Ukraine's sovereignty, wait 6 months. Wait 6 months, and it's going to be fundamentally worse for Ukraine, and the deal will be worse for them then.
No, the deal's only going to get, the best deal is the first deal, right? The best deal is always the first deal. Every single deal since then, the price goes up and up and up. And not just in terms of concessions, but also in terms of the amount of men, materiel, manpower, and human lives that are lost every single day on the battlefield of a war of choice, a war of choice. Right back, Jack Posobiec and Caldwell, Human Events Daily.